Father, thank you for today. Thank you for bringing us together for the study of your word, that we may take from it what you mean for us to have to apply to our lives, to become better men from it, to those that we know and those yet that we are yet to meet. Thank you for the sacrifice of your Son, our holy Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, that we came, that died for us so we could come before you, white as snow and sin. Father, in the name of your Son, our holy Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, we open this study. Amen.
Amen. Okay, Tony, you probably have us in the right place, which is verse 27 through 40. And anybody need to double check the chapter here? Because I'm pretty flaky about that sometimes. 21?
21?
Yeah, we're in chapter 21.
We got 27, okay.
Yeah, we should be, verses 27 through 40. And when the 7 days were, we're in the right place. Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. So, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so this is how much I'm going to read. So, it'll take me a little while to get through all the King James. Alright, starting verse 27, and when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews, which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple and hath polluted this holy place. For they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Doesn't this sound like America right now, by the way, on a entirely different context? Doesn't it? Who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them, and when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he had done. Verse 34, and some cried one thing, some another, among the multitude, and when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was borne of the soldiers for the violence of the people. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying, Away with him! And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian which before these days madest an uproar and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying, and we'll talk in a few minutes about what he started to say there. And that'll be in chapter 22, by the way. In spite of it, now we're going to read from the syllabus text, Dr. Welch's take on all this. In spite of his submission to the vow, Paul was set upon by a mob of unbelieving Jews who saw him in the temple and mistakenly concluded that he had brought a Gentile in with him. A riot was stirred up by Jews which were of Asia, where Paul had just completed his most extensive evangelism. These would appear to be related to the same people who had so violently opposed him during his missionary journeys. The uproar that resulted nearly brought about Paul's death, and he was spared only by the commander of the Roman garrison stationed there.
What number you want? What verse number?
He's reading from.
I'm reading from the script here, the syllabus.
The one I couldn't find.
Yeah, well, look for the word uproar and you'll be on track in 21 near the end.
Okay.
Okay, now where was I? Okay, soldiers were normally housed in the Tower of Antonio, northwest of the temple area, having easy access to the temple courtyard by 2 flights of stairs. During the time of trouble, these soldiers could run into the courtyard to restore order. The chief captain, I'm going to try to say it in Greek here because Dr. Welch has it on his syllabus as a transliteration, Kiliarchus, it's not so hard to say, brought a band of soldiers and centurions, numbering at least 200 men, and interviewed just in time to save Paul's life so that the Jews left beating of Paul. Yes, that is, they stopped beating him. He was then arrested by the chief captain, chained and carried by the soldiers to the top of the stairs and into the castle, that is, barracks. The violence of the people, and this is in verse 35 if you want to try to get to verse 35, that'll bring you right up to speed here, was so extreme that the soldiers literally had to fight off the crowd in order for the captain to speak personally to Paul. Upon arriving in the barracks, Paul asked if he could speak to the captain, who was surprised to find that he could speak Greek. Note that there can be no doubt that Greek was freely spoken as the common language of that day, as a form of communication between both Romans and Jews. Which I always find interesting because Rome was in Italy, if you remember correctly. Anyway, the Roman Kiliarch was surprised because he thought Paul was that Egyptian who had earlier rallied 4,000 men in an attempt to overthrow the government. History records that this revolt was led by an Egyptian Jew who rallied supporters called in Latin Sicarii, daggermen, because each carried a dagger from the Latin word sica, with which he might assassinate military and political leaders. The revolt had been crushed by the Roman procurator Felix, but the Egyptian had escaped. Paul assured the tribune that he was a Jew and that he had the right to enter the temple precincts, and that he was also a citizen of the important city of Tarsus. And it is also likely that he asserted his Roman citizenship in order to receive fair treatment from the Roman soldiers. It is interesting to note that Paul's citizenship was a protection to him, which his master Jesus did not have. Standing on the stairs, he beckoned with the hand and addressed the people in the Hebrew tongue. Since many of the Jews of the diaspora could speak only Greek, the apostle gained the attention of the native crowd by speaking in their own dialect. The New Testament makes it clear that the apostle was certainly trilingual, if not quadrilingual, speaking Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and probably to some degree Latin. Paul identifies the fact that he spoke more language than any of the Corinthians. I was thinking of something else I was going to say today about languages, ironically. Okay, anyway, moving into chapter 22 now, we're going to be reading, actually we're going to go from 1 all the way through 21. From the King James on the screen there. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. That when they heard that he spoke in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence, and he saith, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women, as also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all of the estate of the elders, from which also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. And it came to pass that, as I made my journey, and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell to the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said to me, Unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. And one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked upon him. And he said, The God of our fathers hath chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all the men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now why tarriest thou? Arise, and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And it came to pass that, when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and saw him saying unto me, Make haste, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know that I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. Visualize some of that. Just visualize somebody telling you this kind of stuff. It's like, are you sure? Excuse me, but, I've got other things that I want to do in my life, And I thought like I would. Hopefully none of you can think like that. And I'm setting a bad example even explaining it. I just kind of think of it. Ken will correct me afterwards.
I just love the transition in verse 22. They were listening. They were cool until he said that one word.
Which one?
The last word of 21. They gave him audience under this word. And then he said something about the Gentiles.
Yep.
That's why I from the shreds again.
Yeah, the Gentiles, yep.
Yep.
So anyway, in the latter chapters of Asia, we find the most extensive personal references to Paul's life and experiences. These form an extensive biography of one of the most important early church leaders. It is interesting to note that Paul made his defense on the same Roman stairway where Pilate had condemned Christ to death some 26 years earlier. The attitude of the Jewish mob also reflects a similar treatment of the Lord's servant who had returned in one last desperate appeal for the Jews to come to Christ. Paul used the opportunity to relate his conversion on the Damascus road. He also emphasized his Jewish heritage as one brought up in this city, that is Jerusalem, and educated by the outstanding rabbi of that time, Gamaliel, and being a Pharisee in his zeal for the law. Then he reminded the Jews that he himself had originally persecuted this way, referring to the way of Christ. Paul went on to explain the Damascus vision, the voice that cried to him, and his resulting question, Who art thou, Lord? And the response, I am Jesus of Nazareth. The statement in verse 9, that those that were with him saw the light but heard not the voice, has been wrestled with by some commentators in comparing the statement in verse 9:7. Chapter 9, verse 7, where the soldiers also heard the voice of Christ. It is significant that the verb to hear, akuo, that's an English thing, uses different grammatical cases for its object in these two instances. In 9:7, the use of the genitive case implies that they heard a sound coming from some unidentified source, whereas the accusative case in chapter 22, verse 9, indicates that they did not hear it as intelligible speech. Paul further emphasized that he then was instructed to go into Damascus, where he would meet a man who would tell him what to do. He then explained that man was Ananias, who was a devout man according to the law, an obvious apologetic appeal, who then told them that the God of our fathers had chosen him to know his will, and see that just one is a reference to Christ, and that he should be a witness unto all men of what he had seen and heard. Paul further referred to the incident of the martyr Stephen and his part in his death, and how he had hoped originally to bring the message of Christ only to the Jews. But instead the Lord said, I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. Little sidebar here. I don't expect any of you to answer this question, but how many times have we been put in positions of being expected to or being required to do things that we simply did not want to do? Now, for my own case, that's probably no more than 25 times a day. But the reality is, when we determine to accept and do some things that we may not in ourselves want to do at that time for whatever particular reasons. Am I giving a sermon here, Ken?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't normally sermonize, but you know, he's my foil, by the way. You know, he's the one who will give me a critique later on about the whole performance here.
I have a lot of people who love doing that.
But anyway, the point is, I meet with people often, and often the phrase that I hear is, I won't do that, or I don't want to do that. May I just tell you?
I'm not asking you.
I think everyone, I'm not sure if you know, and I'm not sure if you other two know, I definitely did not want to do inmate ministry the first day
Yeah.
that I was literally forced into doing inmate ministry. But that turned out to be one of the most rewarding ministries I've had in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first bona fide card-carried registered ministry. And I fought, and I kicked, and I screamed, and I gouged, and ripped my fingernails off, and whatever else to avoid it.
Let's make a comment.
Fast forward, where am I today? Some of you have made mistakes. Some of you are here for a reason that involves perhaps mistakes. I don't know, and I don't question any of that. It doesn't matter to me to be able to come up here and teach and try to be a minister. It simply doesn't matter to me. It can't matter to me. If it matters to me, then I'm crap as a minister, frankly. You know, if you know ministers like that, well, I can't apologize for all the ministers in the world. But the point that I hope that you'll take just from my brief soliloquy here, not so brief perhaps, but nonetheless a soliloquy, is that, you know, when you have to do something you don't want to do, don't fight it necessarily. I'm not saying, I mean, if somebody's telling you to go rob a bank, well, okay, don't do something you don't want to do in that situation. Just listen to the person who's telling you, don't rob that bank. Okay? There are people that will give you good advice, but just because you don't want to do it might not be the best reason in the world to refuse to do it.
There's a big giant fish that might swallow you up.
Yeah.
If you're running from your duty.
Yeah, and right now in my daily reading, I'm reading about Gideon.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, sorry, Gideon was a jerk at the beginning.
This is, it makes the ground wet.
Come on, Lord, prove to me. Lord gracious, you see that lightning bolt? Well, did you catch that? No, he did. Anyway, back to the verses now. I'm going to be to verse 22. Thank you, Tony, for being right there. Going through verse 30, and they gave him audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voices and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust into the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourgings, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is Roman, and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. The chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. I would like to say a few words about the next one. I'm not. We'll just go back into, now we're going to go back into the syllabus, so you can hear from Dr. Welsh's words, primarily, except when I pepper in one or two of my own. Until this point, the crowd had retained a hostile silence, but with the mention of Paul's divine call to the Gentiles, they burst into rage, demanding that he be taken away. He lifts us from the earth, because he was not fit to live. The hostile Jewish mob tore their clothes and threw dust in the air and made such a tumult that the chief captain brought him into the barracks. They then prepared to scourge him. At this point, Paul reminded the men with the whip that it was unlawful to scourge a Roman who was not condemned by lawful trial. That's in verse 25. The chief captain was amazed to discover that Paul was a Roman citizen and assumed that he had obtained this freedom with a great sum of money, to which Paul replied that he was freeborn by virtue of having been born in the colony city of Tarsus. In fact, the chief captain was now even fearful of the fact that he had bound Paul in the first place. So he decided to allow him to appear before the chief priest and all their council, that is, the Sanhedrin, to determine wherefore he was accused of the Jews and whether any adequate grounds existed for a legal proceeding against Paul. I'm sure if you know anything about the Sanhedrin, you know that he's probably still in for a bit of tussle. Okay, moving into chapter 23 then.
One time, I just can't help but believe at that point.
Okay,
It brings out, until they brought up his ministry, it mentioned that word Gentile. They were fine, we're dealing with the common Jew, you know? Peter and the 12 had been preaching all over Jerusalem. They're still in Jerusalem, that's where they're bound. Paul's told to leave Jerusalem, to go to the Gentiles, but they didn't have problems with the common Jew. Their problem was with the Sanhedrin and the leaders. And it's the same thing today. You can talk about Peter and Jesus and the 12, and you're fine. But if you ever talk to a Jew, a Protestant, especially conservative or Orthodox Jew, and you bring up the name of Shaul, the dust goes up in the air, and you can't believe you even mentioned that hypocrite. It's a violent response today if you bring up Saul or Paul. It's the same thing. But you can talk about Peter and the 12. You can talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
Boy, don't not bring up that guy.
And it's kind of sad, you know, because of, I think it's kind of sad because of the diplomatic relations that we have with the nation of Israel. You know, and sometimes I wonder how tenuous that relationship might be based upon their part. Do they still have an acting, practicing Sanhedrin today? I don't know. Do you?
No, they're that sort of, kids, what is it called?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Knesset,
Yeah.
the Knesset,
Yeah.
yeah.
But they have it set up according to the prophecy things that I read. They have that in the temple and all that set up, and there you go. It's just interesting how accurate this is, even 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
This is accurate.
Wow!
This is totally true. You know?
No,
Down to the emotional fervor of reaction towards Paul. It's so true. Nothing
you got a
else.
life on. I'm talking about it.
Yeah, Tony, did I know you?
No, I was trying to do something.
Oh, okay.
They want to jump in with him, he's going to disappear. Where'd he go?
Okay, all right, we ready to listen to some more King James? Are you getting enthusiastic to King James?
Absolutely, always.
I've always loved King James. It's weird, a little bit weird, I guess, but I think it's a little more accurate perhaps. All right, so yes, chapter 23. Now I'm going to read 1 through 10 right now. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. And then said Paul, smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, means no. I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part rose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and to bring him into the castle. Got everyone scared now. Right? So, from the syllabus, Paul began by protesting his innocence before the council, stating that he had lived in all conscience, good conscience before God. Throughout his epistles and recorded sermons, there are numerous references by Paul to the importance of having a clear conscience with God and man. Pay attention to that part, guys. Ananias was the high priest that commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Israel from about 48 to 58. Okay, I don't know why that's just all by itself there, but anyway. A crude and overbearing man, he was angered by Paul's claim and commanded someone who stood by to smite him on the mouth. Jesus similarly had been struck during his trial. In response to the action of the high priest, Paul replied, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. The term whited wall suggests a whitewashed coating over a precarious, tottering wall. Paul's outburst might seem strong to some until one realizes the tremendous pressure that he was under and the tension of the moment in which his life was literally at stake. Also note that the action of the high priest was contrary to the law. The crowd, however, was shocked by Paul's response in reviling the high priest. Paul then seemed to change the tactic of his defense. Realizing that the situation was stacked against him, Paul replied that he did not know that he was the high priest, probably the result of the action and character which he displayed, for certainly he would have been dressed in some manner to indicate who he was. Instead, Paul recognized that the Sanhedrin, of which he probably was originally a member, as the ruling body of the Jews, was composed of both Pharisees and Sadducees. They held the majority and differed with each other on important matters of doctrine such as the resurrection, angels, and the nature of supernatural intervention. Paul used their difference to gain an opportunity to save his own life. He openly identified himself as a Pharisee and a believer in the resurrection of the dead, thus causing an immediate split between the assembled Pharisees and the resurrection-denying Sadducees. I would say it's pretty clever. The clamor became so intense that Paul was removed by the Roman commander, and the interview before the Sanhedrin came to a close. Paul's statement that he had been called into question because of the hope and resurrection of the dead was true in light of the fact that he believed in the resurrection as the hope of the dead. The Pharisees naively arose to Paul's defense, but the dissension became so intense that Paul was returned to the barracks. Okay, back into the King James, verse 11 through 22.
Already there.
Okay, thank you, sir. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. Now me, again, just a sidebar. Me, I would have said, I don't really want to mess around with this stuff anymore. Thank you, Lord. Let me do something else. That's me, but I'm not Paul. Okay, never forget that. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And there were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, We have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now, therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain that ye bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, and we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him.
Yeah, okay.
And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul.
Tell me what.
Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, Bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, What is that thou hast to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to desire that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire something of him more perfectly. But do not yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves under an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, See thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. From the syllabus now. One of the heartwarming and encouraging statements of Paul's entire life occurred at this point, when that night the Lord stood by him, referring to a literal appearance of Christ who came to Paul to be of good cheer, for he must bear witness also in Rome. Paul had often hoped to get to Rome, and at Ephesus he even made plans to go to Rome. But at this point he was not even sure he would get out of Jerusalem alive. But now for the first time, God had confirmed his original plan. It is difficult to state honestly these many centuries later whether Paul made a mistake in going to Jerusalem or whether the Lord knew all along that he would go to Jerusalem, and warned him so that he would be prepared for the ultimate consequences, and used his arrest as the opportunity to get into the place where he ultimately wanted to go. Certainly, Paul's life shows us time and again that God can overrule the most difficult of human circumstances in order to accomplish his will. He may even overrule our own will, so that his ultimate will may be done. The next day, certain of the Jews banded together Ellipsis under a curse in a unified effort to kill Paul. The extent of their fanaticism can be understood when we realize that the execution of this plot certainly would have meant the death of many of them at the hands of the Roman guard who protected Paul. Such intense religious fanaticism was common among the Jews of that day. Paul's sister's son, nephew, learned of their lying in wait, ambush, and came to warn Paul. This is the only reference in the New Testament to Paul's family, and we have no clear indication as to who this person was. The Roman commander quickly removed Paul that night to Caesarea, protected by 470 armed soldiers. He sent a letter on ahead to Felix in Caesarea explaining why Paul was being transferred to his authority. Okay, we're going to talk next about Paul's defense before Felix and Festus, but rather than get started on that with only about 3 minutes, let's go ahead and start your break early and let you have that as a bonus. One. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. No drama there, right?
Yeah.
And
We'll
talk about that in a moment too. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also, to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antiochus. On the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So, into the syllabus. Paul was transferred under a heavily armed guard to Felix the governor. Another title would be procurator. The troop departed during the third hour of the night, between 9 and 10 p.m., and brought him safely into Caesarea. The transcript of the official letter sent by the tribune Claudius Lysias unto Felix is given in length in verses 26 through 30. The nature of the letter seems to indicate that the tribune was afraid that he might have accorded some improper treatment to this Roman citizen, and therefore wanted to make sure that the situation was properly handled. In the morning, they arrived at Antiochus, some 40 miles from Jerusalem, and well on the way to Caesarea. Being out of immediate danger of the Jews, the majority of the guard returned, and 70 horsemen accompanied Paul the remaining distance. Learning that Paul was a citizen of Cilicia, the governor agreed to hear the case when the accusers arrived to bring formal charges against him. So now moving into chapter 24, verses 1 through 9.
24?
Yeah, chapter 24 now. Got stuck that in there when you weren't looking. Okay, verses 1 through 9 from the scripture. And after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always, and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Are you getting the interjection of sarcasm that I'm sure what the doctor would have Lord would have wanted that, but anyway, notwithstanding, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray that thou wouldest hear of us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple whom we took, and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things, whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. Antonius Felix was the governor of Judea from 52 to 59, and was a man of servile origin who owed his unprecedented advancement to the influence of his brother at the imperial court of Claudius. His governorship was marked by a period of unrest and several Jewish uprisings, which resulted in ruthless response by Felix, which in turn alienated more Jews and led to further revolts. Tacitus, the Roman historian, wrote of him, Felix, indulging in every kind of barbarity and lust, exercised the power of a king in the spirit of a slave. He had 3 successful marriages to princesses who elevated his status among the Romans. The first of 3 was the granddaughter of Anthony, whose father is now responded. The third was Priscilla, an infant statement. Go thy way 5 days, Ananias arrived at the convenient season for Tertullus. The closing verses of the chapter indicate that he had hoped for a bribe as the official revelation. However, the bribe was never forthcoming. And after 2 years, Felix was recalled to Rome by the Emperor Nero under an accusation of bad administration by the Jews of his dominions. Porcius Festus succeeded him as procurator of Judea, and Felix left Paul in prison for his successor to decide his fate. Thereby he hoped to pacify the Jews who were now bringing the accusation against him. Now we're going to move to chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. Now when Festus was come into the province after 3 days, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him, and desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. Let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down into Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar, Have I offended anything at all? But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, Wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? Then said Paul, I stand in Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. In 58, Felix's soldiers put down a riot of Jews in Caesarea with such violence that he was replaced by Festus, a more fair and honorable ruler, the one who was unable to control the situation in Palestine, which had now become a hotbed of revolution and within 12 years would come under the wrath of the emperor himself. Upon his arrival in the province, Festus went from Caesarea to Jerusalem. There, the high priest and the Jews again brought charges against Paul, requesting that he be sent to Jerusalem in hope that they might ambush him on the way. Instead, Festus resisted their pressure and returned to Caesarea, where the Jews were forced to come, and made formal charges against the apostle before the judgment seat. The Greek word there is bema. You've probably heard of the bema seat. Okay. When Festus suggested that Paul return to Jerusalem to be tried, the apostle then appealed to Caesar's judgment seat. It is clear that Paul was willing to accept the penalty of death if he had done anything worthy of death. Festus, seeing an immediate way out, honored the appeal to Caesar, who was Nero, having begun his reign in 54. The early years of his rule were gentle in nature and gave no hint of the awful cruelties which would soon follow. And we'll break right there because other than that, I got to read about.
What verse?
We're now going to be, we're in chapter 25, verse 13, Tony.
All right.
Thank you for asking. Okay, we have the person who would care to close in prayer. Always remember that I know how to pray. Okay. All right, Father God, we do thank you for this time together, Father God. I thank you, Father God, for this assembly of men, Father God, who will sit here daily, Father God, and diligently listen to the words that are presented from this podium, Father God. I thank you for their attention, Father God, or I thank you for whatever it is they choose to do instead of attention. I'm quite fine with that as well, Father. But I do thank you. I thank you for the opportunity to stand here, Father God. I thank you for the knowledge that I receive even as I'm reading these things, Father God, the things that I may not have known about. And I pray, Father God, that some morsels of huge interest to somebody here today will reach, Father God. So I ask you to bless these men as they go forth, Father God, and bless their meal in the mighty, precious name of your wonderful Son, Jesus Christ Almighty. Amen.